you ever wish that you'd done more stuff?
No. To be honest, no. We were just workers. We weren't art. This thing of art, there's no such thing as art photography. She was like being a plumber. Just wanted to be good at it, except that when you had another state-registered nut, you realised you'd met a nutter, so you then got involved with them. And we did, all three of us spoke for hours and hours ad nauseam, boring one another with all that shit. No?
Yeah, you spoke more than me. I'm sorry.
I thought you did.
No.
I don't know. What do you mean I spoke
50
more than
years.
you?
You're always rabbiting.
After 6 years at Vogue, Duffy was one of fashion's biggest names. But he was restless and looking for ways to spread his wings.
I started doing advertising. I bring it back to Vogue, and they were taking like 70% of it. And I felt it was totally unfair. So eventually I thought, sod you, I'll start on my own. And I did.
In 1963, now with 3 children and a 4th on the way, Duffy left the magazine to set up his own studio at the family home in London's Swiss cottage.
I mean, I photographed for Queen, Town, Nova, went over to Paris, worked for Elle, where I could really come to fruition because the frogs are always prepared to get into an argument, which I love. I think it was my best work. Those frogs, they're so demanding bastards. They would consider other possibilities. So if all the photographs are out of focus, the Brits would think, oh, God, doesn't know what he's doing, broken camera, whereas the frogs would think, interesting, I wonder if there's an attempt to express in a different way a visual perception of whatever. And then they'd say, but of course it could be a broken camera. Fantastic, suited me to the ground.
I suppose the kind of, for me, the memorable shoots were the ones that we did on Nova magazine, and especially kind of how to undress in front of your husband. Someone came up with the idea of why we do an article about how a woman should actually strip for her husband or a lover, and also turn it into a fashion feature. I wanted to do this flick book, which was the full strip. And Duffy said, there's a perfect girl for this. He said, she's an ex-Crazy Horse stripper. And I said, oh, it's Amanda Lear, she's fantastic. Crazy Horse was the kind of in thing at the time. I mean, you know, it was kind of expensive she clubs to go to.
I've been to see a mate of ours, Bailey and I, called Monty Landis in Paris. And he said, oh, come round and see me at the Crazy Horse. Well, we needed no encouragement to go and look at women with no clothes on. So we went round and met this fantastic stripper.
I think the shoot took over a week or maybe a bit longer. And in walked this amazing kind of, 6-foot blonde German girl. And Duffy just got the idea immediately. And I mean, without actually kind of making it over raunchy. I mean, the cover, stunning. I mean, it's just kind of this girl with actually nothing showing, but everything left to the imagination. It comes out and it's a fantastic success, but someone tells one of the publishing director of the Nova magazine that the person on the front was a man. And I nearly got fired for it.
At what point did you realise that the woman you were photographing was actually a man?
Well, I knew she was a man because Monty had told me she was a fella when we met him later. Probably in, I don't know, a couple of months when he came back from Paris. I said, oh, he wound you up, that's a guy. What?
I guess the suggestion was that you had perhaps chosen her deliberately, kind of,
Do you think that sounds like me? Do you think that sounds like me? I'm totally innocent. As a bystander, helping culture and art.
Amanda Lear has always refused to confirm or deny rumours about her gender. Duffy's unconventional ways made him a magnet for the 60s elite, and his basement studio became a hotbed of creative talent.
Downstairs was the living accommodation, and June, his wife, was there with the children, and then upstairs was studio at the front, and everything happened. Bailey used to bring in... Peter O'Toole used to come in, and they'd bring in their absolutely enormous magnums of champagne with them, and the Beatles, I think John Lennon came in, and he said, "You don't mind if I just bring my friend in, Ringo, with me?" We used to have Michael Caine, was in a lot.
A young David Putnam was also a frequent visitor to Duffy's studio. Then an ambitious 21-year-old advertising exec, he would later go on to be an agent to both Duffy and David Bailey.
I remember Patsy and I going over and having lunch, and I remember going up to his studio and him taking some photographs. The basement they lived in was one of the most creative environments I ever walked into in my life. I mean, Duffy couldn't have been Duffy without June and without the family. There's no possibility he would have been... Well, first of all, I think he probably would have vanished up his own orifice. The whole essence of him was this extraordinary thing he created, what they created. It had the most amazing effect on Patsy and I, because I know that we would go, you know, we knew we want some of that. Whatever that is, I want some of that.
Good to see you.
And you. Oh, God, good to see you.
Hello, darling.
Still got his earpiece on.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much. All right, you two. Now, Patsy, come here with your old man.
Oh, I blinked, sorry.
Let me just have that back on there, just have a quick look. A fiver.
He wasn't quite as compliant with his assistant in the past. The assistant would get a terrible bollocking. It was you risked death being his assistant.
God, who tightens these things up? Move that way a little, the pair of you. More. Don't fall down there. Right. That's it, hold on. Do it now. Good.
By the end of the 60s, Duffy was shooting all over the world. But being a top photographer wasn't enough. The ambitious snapper had bigger plans in mind.
Well, I wanted to make a film. Having diagnosed photographs, I wondered where one could take that in film terms. I happened to be on a Saturday with Bailey, walking down from his old employer, and we arrived for some godforsaken reason at Stratford East, and there was a poster. It said, "Over the Lovely War." It was a new musical opening, and I thought, God. So I said, God, this looks interesting, to which Bailey immediately said, "What are you talking about?" with that normal sensitivity. So I conned him, so we bought 4 tickets.
The Army and the Navy need attention. The outlook isn't healthy, you'll admit. But I have a perfect dream of a...
I just was so ripped apart by this musical. I felt balls had been torn out of me. I really did. I cried. It made me cry.
He said, "Let's make a film called Oh, What a Lovely War." And I always thought of it as like a musical documentary. But then it started to get more and more complicated, and suddenly all the lovers were involved. So I sold my share to Len Dayton for £49. So I was probably the only person that didn't lose money on it.
Len Dayton, a writer, had been friends with Duffy since art school. Fresh from the success of the film adaptation of his book, The Ipcress File, the pair set up a production company, with Len agreeing to write the screenplay for their new venture.
Then met Dickie Attenborough. And Dickie said to him, confidentially, "I've always wanted to direct a film." Dickie's one of the most charming men you've ever met. And the most people who've done me the most damage in my life have been charming people. They release that unctuous lubricant called charm. Beware. It's not unlike KY. Get you into a lot of trouble.
Jerry, darling, if Alf rehearsed, is he going to hold you up, or would you prefer him to go to somewhere else? Because he can quite easily. You are sure?
Well, I think he kind of lost control, in a way, with all those lovies, because they're like a gang, aren't they? A gang of lovies. I wonder what you'd call a gang of lovies.
German, France.
In the end, Duffy accepted a producer credit, and Len Deighton took his name off the film. It went on to win numerous awards, launching Richard Attenborough's career as a director.
I think from Dickie's point of view, it was a successful experience. I was at the premiere, ironically invited by Duffy. There was certainly a froideur between the two of them. They'd fallen out by then. Duffy would have always been trying to do something with that film, I think, that maybe was not doable, or certainly wasn't doable within the convention, the norms of the time. Also, I can well imagine that he wouldn't have worked within the film industry. Film industry is very specific. It's structured. It's a series of interrelationships. You try to protect your friendships and your relationships. You try not to fall out with people. Duffy would have found that very hard.
As the 70s brought economic and social unrest to Britain, Duffy abandoned movie making and returned to photography to make a living. In 1973, he was asked to shoot a Pirelli pin-up calendar, the second of his career. But where the 60s had been all about pioneering a natural sensuality, this calendar would require a more overt sexual aesthetic.
Well, they were going to have an artist, a sexual artist, Alan Jones, who'd got a reputation for being. You know, he'd done the hat stand, you know, those models. Polanski had bought one of his tables or chairs or that. He was a really very important pre-punk artist.
Alan Jones and Duffy and my models. I think that Alan Jones is quite a normal sort of chap, isn't he? Whereas Duffy is not a normal chap.
A company rang me and said, would you like to do a Pirelli calendar? I said if I did 12 paintings I could have an exhibition, and that it was more interesting to me to manipulate imagery that I couldn't create in my own studio. And so to have the use of a professional fashion photographer and an airbrush artist, I thought would be fun.
The idea was he would do a drawing and he'd say how he wanted to express it through a photograph that I would take, and how he would then artwork it. He gave me little sketches, layouts, which I was used to working, because loads of photographs advertising photographs stay like that.
I think when that calendar started, I think Duffy's view was that he was going to interpret these drawings. And I think that in reality what happened was that Alan Jones thought that Duffy was going to exactly copy these drawings. In other words, Duffy was only going to be a technician, physically pressing the button and doing the lighting. Whereas I don't think that's what Duffy thought at all. The long and short of it, at the end of the day, Duffy removed his name from it.
I took my name off because I thought it was all wrong. He was getting credit for things he wasn't even at. Some of them, the photographs were taken and he wasn't involved. He was losing interest. In a way, I think he thought it was beneath him, in a way.